The meeting will begin in 30 seconds. The meeting will begin in 10 seconds.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July Pitt County Planning Board meeting. Also to the people that's watching us through cable. Welcome to Pitt County Planning Board meeting. And also I'd like to welcome Commissioner Colson that's out in the audience. We have roll call now, please.
Dave Barefoot. Here. Don Brown.
Here.
David Davenport.
Here.
Brad Guth.
Here.
R.J. Hemby. Ricky Hines.
Here.
Steve Little.
Here.
Tucker Moore.
Here.
Johnny Penner. Maria Rogerson. Here. Danny Smith.
Here.
Okay. We will have prayer by Don Brown, Pledge of Allegiance by Ricky Hines. Could please stand, please.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly, most graceful Father, we bow down this evening, Lord, to give you thanks. We ask you to govern us as we conduct the business for the planning board this evening. Bless those that are coming and that are in the building with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Let us all say amen.
Amen. Amen. All right, we can turn and face the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Don. Next item up is the approval of the June meeting.
Move that we approve the minutes.
Second, Don Brown.
Okay. I got a motion and a second that we approve the June minutes. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. All right. Welcome, Mr. Hemby.
Thank you.
Next up, we have rezoning request. Eric is up with the rezoning request.
Yes, sir. And before we get into anything with the rezoning request, the request is by Glenn Steiner. Mr. Steiner and his partner, Mr. Farrow, are here tonight. And in light of staff's recommendation, which we've been discussing with them prior to the meeting, they are requesting to postpone the request tonight.
Okay. So they would like to just postpone this
Yes, sir.
and put it off to the next meeting, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just they would like to have an opportunity to kind of try to get the request to a state where staff can recommend approval on it.
Okay, all right, we can do that.
We need an action. So we need a
I move we honor the request.
A second.
Okay. I have a motion that we honor the request to move it to next month's meeting. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
thank you. So we will present that at the August meeting.
Okay.
Just skip ahead here to my next item.
Next up is the zoning ordinance that you're gonna cover.
Yes, sir. I'll be going through the zoning ordinance amendments. We are proposing several amendments to the Pitt County zoning ordinance. We've talked about this several times with the board. We have, on the screen it says 4, but in front of you have a 5th item that we've, since the packet went out last week, we had a couple other little small changes we need to make or revisions to the ordinance to make. So of those 5 items, the first is to implement the recommendations of the Southwest Bypass Land Use Plan. The second is amendments to consolidate conditional and special uses into one category. The third is to amend the submittal requirements for conditional district rezonings. And fourth is to amend the special purpose lots to allow mail cluster box units, or what's known as cluster mailboxes. So these amendments are proposed to become effective on January 1st of next year. We're presenting them according to the following schedule. First is tonight, present the draft amendments to this board just for your review, and be happy to answer any questions you have afterwards. Tentatively scheduling a public hearing on August 21st at this board so that we can get a board recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and then take that recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on September 23rd. And so again, those are tentative. We have another meeting we're planning with the Rinston area stakeholders, and depending on the outcome of that meeting, we may adjust that schedule some. But as of right now, we're tentatively proposing to go August and September for public hearings. So the first part of these amendments is the implementation of the Southwest Bypass Land Use Plan. And these are, again, to implement the recommendations, including cluster development regulations, creation of the Rinston Rural Historic District overlay with specific permitted uses, the creation of a Southwest Bypass corridor overlay, as well as some enhanced lighting standards for non-residential uses. So cluster development, these regulations are intended to encourage the design for residential development that minimizes land disturbance. It would group building lots for greater protection of natural resources than a conventional subdivision would. It encourages open space, reduces runoff, and helps preserve the agricultural character of the area where it's located. So this is just an example. This is a mock-up that was done by our consultant. You see this would result in a little bit higher density of residential lots. They're grouped together a little bit closer. Larger lots would be sort of situated towards the outskirts of the property, and then in between you're still preserving the open space. Could be farmland, could be floodplain areas. But it would preserve that land for just open use. In cluster development, the minimum tract size in the RA and RR and R40 would be 25 acres, so anything less than that wouldn't be suitable for cluster development. Then the SR and MFR, that would be 10 acres, and those are two categories or two districts that also would have public sewer generally available to them. Requirement would be a minimum of 15% of the total area of development would be set aside for open space. And then as that percentage goes up, the incentive would be to provide some greater lot size reductions. So 15 to 20%, you'd have a 10% lot reduction. 21 to 30% would be 20, and then anything over 30 would be a 30% lot reduction. Larger lots, again, would be clustered along tree lines and open space areas, and would use shared driveways, which would not be used for any more than 2 lots. And then these types of development would require a 50-foot wide landscaping buffer along U.S. or North Carolina highways. The Rinston Rural Historic District overlay that we're proposing, this would be established to protect historic properties and the agricultural nature of the Rinston area. As we mentioned, we have met with stakeholders from Rinston, met with them back in December and February, and got input on the sort of things they'd like to see in the Rinston area. And out of those meetings, we were able to develop a list of specific permitted uses to the RHD. And if you look in your agenda packets on page 33, that is the permitted use table. And you see the last column that's added there is for the RHD. And so they said there were certain types of uses that they did want to see and did not want to see. And so that's reflected in that table. Some of the things that they wanted to see were things that might be more conducive to an agricultural or rural environment, things like bakeries, arts and crafts stores, even some restaurants that not of the fast food variety, but of a sit-down restaurant. And so you can see that is in that district. And it's a little bit different because with the overlay, the underlying district still remains the same. Most of the properties in Rinston are rural residential. And so there are uses in that RHD overlay that would be permitted that would not be permitted in RR otherwise. Some of the commercial uses wouldn't be permitted in RR. But because it's an overlay and because it's only allowed in that area, we're proposing to just make those changes to that permitted use table. So this is the Rinston Rural Historic District. It's about 85 properties, close to 1,700 acres of land. It's located primarily on NC 903 between the North Store Road and Frog Level Road areas, and lots of large open land areas out there. Some of the changes that we're proposing for the overlay, and again, this comes from a lot of the discussion we had with the stakeholders, is that they wanted, for residential development, they wanted larger lots. They didn't want smaller lots. So the proposal is to increase the minimum lot size to 60,000 square feet. It's currently 25,000. Again, all but I think 2 properties in Rinston are zoned rural residential. So for the most part, the minimum lot size now would be 25,000. So looking to more than double that for the lot size. Lot width would be 175 feet from the current 100. Front setback would increase significantly to 100 feet from 30 in a private subdivision road or 40 off a state maintained road. And side and rear setback would increase to 30 feet. For major subdivisions in the Rinston Rural Historic District overlay, they would be required to provide a minimum of 10% of open space. So sort of anything that would be developed in this would almost be like the cluster development like we talked about. Whereas the cluster development is a voluntary thing for large tracts of land. This would be required for any type of major subdivision in Rinston. And then also provide a 50-foot wide undisturbed buffer along US or NC highways. For those non-residential uses, we're proposing some specific design standards. First is that the building and facade and appearance standards have to be more consistent with the character of the area. So one of the things we heard is that they didn't want any metal buildings out there with flat roofs. They want it to kind of blend into the area. So for non-residential, it's got to have a pitched roof, can't be more than 2 stories in height, and then the facade has to be either brick or stone or wood of some type. It can't be just a metal building. There's fencing and buffering requirements. Any kind of fencing that they provide can't be over 6 feet tall, and it can't be in the front yard. It has to be in the side or rear yards. Parking lots would have to be oriented behind or to the side of the building, and any light fixtures that are provided have to be what they call full cutoff. That means that there's no light spillage onto adjacent properties, and it doesn't shine up, it shines down to where it's focused. The Southwest Bypass Highway Corridor overlay that we're proposing is established to provide enhanced landscaping, protection, and development standards and access control measures. And this is an area that's generally 1,000 feet on either side of the Southwest Bypass right-of-way. And that's very consistent with our highway corridor overlay requirements that we currently have now. So on this map, you see the area that's shaded in yellow. That is the Southwest Bypass corridor that's in the county's jurisdiction now. And so the highway corridor overlay that's put on top of that would extend about 1,000 feet on each side. So that would give you an idea of the properties that would be included in that overlay. Again, very similar to our current highway corridor overlay, there would be a landscape buffer yard that's required adjacent to the Southwest Bypass right-of-way. It'd be 75 feet for the Southwest Bypass, and a 20-foot wide side and rear landscape buffer yard where non-residential development abuts residential. And again, this is for new non-residential development. This wouldn't be for single-family residential. So if somebody's developing a lot for residents, these buffering requirements will not apply. If they were putting a large-scale commercial use out there, then that's when they would kick in. Roads and access and lot spacing standards, those are identical in the proposal to what we currently have in the highway corridor overlay. We do require, or proposing to require, building placement to be towards the front of the lot at the setback. Large parking lots, anything greater than 20 spaces, would be required to be behind or beside the building, and they'd have to stub out to existing properties with cross-access easements. And again, this is, for the purposes of these requirements, the Southwest Bypass Land Use Plan identified the interchanges as being gateways, and to make sure development kind of looks a certain way and is a little more appealing at those interchanges than other places. And so this is to help achieve that, that requirement. And again, also any kind of lighting would have to be full cutoff as well. And as I mentioned with the lighting standards with Rinston and with the Southwest Bypass, we're also proposing enhancing our lighting standards just in general for non-residential uses in the county. As properties are developed, they'd have to provide a lighting plan. They would have to also provide full cutoff fixtures. Maximum height of a light source would be 20 feet if it's not already attached to a building. And it can't be in close proximity to residential properties so that you don't have that light spillage onto those residential properties. And also we do have some exemptions in there for things like street lights and FAA lighting and that sort of thing. So the second major change we're proposing in our ordinance is the consolidation of conditional and special uses. As this board's aware, we do have conditional and special uses. Now, this board doesn't hear those types of uses very often. Currently, conditional use permits are heard by the Board of County Commissioners, and special uses are heard by the Board of Adjustment. They can be referred back to this board if necessary, but typically this board doesn't consider those types of permits. We've had significantly more conditional use permits considered than we have special use permits. We've had approximately 76 conditional use and 4 special uses. So a lot more activity at the commissioner level with these types of permits than currently at the Board of Adjustment level. So these are the uses that are designated as conditional or special use. The ones that the Board of Commissioners hears the most are typically sand mines, daycares, and an occasional solar farm. Sometimes they may have a salvage yard, but for the most part, it's sand mines and daycares. For special use permits, of the 4 that the Board of Adjustment has heard, 3 of them have been for outdoor shooting ranges, and the other was for a manufactured home park. Both these permits do require a similar public hearing. They have different names and different boards, but for the most part, they are the same type of permit. And they require quasi-judicial procedures, which means any decision that the board makes, whether it's to approve or deny, has to be based on factual evidence and testimony. It's like presenting to a court of law. The Board of Adjustment is also responsible for issuing variances and hearing appeals of decisions by the zoning administrator. And planning staff does conduct an annual training session with the BOA to keep their members abreast of these quasi-judicial procedures and their roles and responsibilities. So given this training, as well as the lack of special use requests, we do believe that the Board of Adjustment, because of their training, their knowledge of these procedures, that they should be the ones really to consider all quasi-judicial requests, including the conditional use. So our proposal is to delete any language with conditional use and make them all special uses to go to the Board of Adjustment. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. The third set of proposals is to amend the submittal requirements for conditional district rezonings. And this would require a conceptual sketch plan rather than a detailed site plan. And there's a reason for this, or a couple reasons for this. One is that it's fairly consistent with other jurisdictions that also do conditional zoning. Other ones allow these sketch plans instead of a full site plan because of the fact that an applicant, when they're coming before this board, they're asking for approval of the project. And so for them to go out and spend money on engineering or plans to be done before that approval is granted, if that request is denied, they've kind of spent that money for no reason, really. And so this would allow them to have a conceptual site plan that would still show all the basic information on a plan, would show the boundaries of the property, how things are going to be laid out, where the parking is supposed to be, that sort of thing, but would not necessarily be required to be prepared by engineer or surveyor or architect, so that they're not spending all that money on professional fees in the event that it's denied. So if the request is approved, then they would still submit a final site plan and would go back through the full review process anyways, but it would just have to conform with that sketch plan and that approval. So in terms of the text, we're also adding some language about any regulations or conditions that are proposed would be more restrictive. And then also, again, amending the site plan to sketch plans. And same information, number 7 and number 10, changing it to from site plans to sketch plan. The fourth section is to amend section 6F of special purpose lots. And this is to clarify that special use or special purpose lots can be used for cluster mailboxes. As this board's aware, with development review proposals, especially of larger subdivisions, we're seeing more and more where they're required to have cluster mailboxes. We have treated them as special purpose lots, which are defined in the ordinance as being a lot that is not required to meet the dimensional requirements of a residential lot. So it wouldn't necessarily, if it's a RR zoning, it wouldn't have to be 25,000 square feet. It just had to be large enough to accommodate the mailbox and any kind of access to it. So our special purpose lots now don't clarify that. They're really for, it says it's for family cemeteries, for utility uses and that sort of thing. So our proposal is just to add mail cluster box units to that definition so that they be allowed under that special purpose lot. And then in front of you, again, we just had a quick one that we had added at the last minute, just after this packet went out. Our county attorney noticed there were some numbering errors in our variance section. So it's to renumber, it's listed as Roman numeral 7 when it should be 5. It goes 4 and then 7. So renumber that section to 5. And then also section 13F under board action on appeals and variances, it states that any one or more of the 6 criteria, there's actually only 5, and that refers back to that section where we just changed the number, or we're proposing to change that number. So again, just changing those, just making a couple quick changes to make sure they're consistent and right. So again, Mr. Chair, we're proposing, just a reminder, to presenting these tonight for your consideration, and then looking to have a public hearing tentatively scheduled for the August meeting, with the Board of County Commissioners hearing it in September, and then proposing them to become effective, if they're approved, to become effective on January 1st of next year. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody might have.
Any questions for Eric? Thank you, Eric.
All right, thank you.
Next up is Jason.
I did want to provide Jason a formal introduction to you. Jason Bryant joined our office earlier this year. He took the place of Chris Lawson. You might remember Chris was primarily the person you'd see presenting any development review plan. So Jason has stepped in. He's going to be here tonight to present a couple to you. So we're really impressed with what he's brought to us so far.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Board. The first we have up for development review is the preliminary plat, the Meadows. It's located at the intersection of John Fleming Road and NC 30 in the Caroline Township. They're proposing 31 lots. It's a 32.5 acre subdivision. The owner is Bear Creek Landing LLC. This is an aerial shot right here to give you an idea of the location. And the intersection down there is the intersection of NC 30 and NC 903. This is a little closer shot up to give you an idea of what the current condition is. This is the proposed subdivision. We do want to note that this is actually, the rezoning request is actually across the street from this. So this is in the same area. We're also noting that there will need to be a stub out to this north, so this plan will change a little bit. It does have some areas in the AE flood zone, and the area in the flood zone you can see there on the right-hand side. The site is rural residential, so that's 25,000 square foot lot size minimums. 5 new streets are proposed. Electricity will be provided by Greenwood Utilities and water by Stokes Regional Water Corporation. This parcel is located within a voluntary ag district buffer, and I turned the buffers on here so that you could see where the site is in relation to the voluntary ag locations. Pitt County Planning's notes, there are some blue line streams existing. part of the wetlands and the flood areas will actually be labeled non-buildable, even though they're not labeled non-buildable now. The stormwater retention pond will later be shown on the plan. That will be in the non-buildable area as well on the right of the map. Though also at the front where there's wetlands, part of that lot will be used for a mailbox cluster and also the stub out to the northern boundary. The roads that are proposed have all been approved and added to the pending road name list. DOT had some pretty standard comments, nothing unusual. Greenville Utilities is requiring that a 10-foot easement come from John Fleming Road to Lot 6, and they're working on that revision right now. Pitt County Environmental Health's comments were standard. They'll also have to have the site evaluated for septic before it can go for final approval. The Stokes Regional Water Corporation has just asked for them to contact the Water Corporation to pay the subdivision fee so their engineers can review and approve the plan. This is a few pictures here. It's actually mostly wooded, and you can see that from the aerial picture there as well. And this is facing the other direction, looking down John Fleming Road from the intersection of NC 30, which would be facing north. This is actually a view from Carolina Township Volunteer Fire Department. Is one of the only images I could get that's actually showing the lot itself. And this is across the street, also where the rezoning request is. And this is the current pathway right now that's existing, just to give you an idea of what it looks like driving in. Adjacent property owners have been notified, and staff has received a couple of phone calls in regards to the proposed development, mainly the general design, and we've had a few people ask what type of homes will be built. And the developer right now is still on the fence, as he told me last. The technical review committee has recommended conditional approval. So now it requires planning board action to approve the preliminary plat with conditions to meet the requirements of the subdivision ordinance, or to disapprove if any standards set forth in the subdivision ordinance are not met.
Okay, what's the pleasure on the board? Anybody have any questions for Jason? You have questions for him?
I just got one quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
I see the drainage going down to the end of the cul-de-sac. I didn't know if where the stormwater pond's gonna be, if there's gonna be an easement required to take that drainage off the end of that cul-de-sac into that wetland flooded area, into the flood zone, because both the storm drain pipes are going that direction.
You're looking at the drainage easement there on the bottom.
Right in that area.
Can y'all see the cursor there in the bottom right? That's lot 17.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they're proposing the stormwater retention pond will be.
Yeah, down here at the bottom.
So I'm assuming the drainage is gonna come around that cul-de-sac from the other side of the road and come into the pond? Okay. Okay.
Any other questions?
Anybody else have any questions? Jason? What's the pleasure?
I move we grant conditional approval.
Got a motion by Mr. Little, second by Ms. Fay Barefoot. All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. You still up, Jason.
Next we have up for for development review is Gobbler's Ridge preliminary plat. This is located on NC 33, east of its intersection with Farmington Road in the Grimesland Township. They're proposing 30 lots, which is 53.3 acres currently, owned by Lena Gay Hudson. This is to give you an idea right here where the proposed subdivision is. This is a little bit better shot here. This is the proposed plan. They'll be creating 2 new streets. It has some AE flood zone, but mainly that's actually in the back where you see the cul-de-sac. There will be an entrance there. It'll be a 40-foot ingress egress, and the flood zone is located outside of the proposed subdivision. Electricity provided by Greenville Utilities Commission. Water services to be provided by Eastern Pines Water. And this parcel is located within a half mile of a voluntary ag district. And that's the buffer there. So it's, when I measured it, it's just barely within that half mile, but still wanted to show you where that existed. Pitt County Planning has requested a 40-foot ingress egress at lot 16, or I'm sorry, not requested, but at lot 16 noted that it's not sufficient for road construction to the remaining parcel. Details of the proposed retention pond should be shown in the construction plan. The pond labeled to be filled on the plan must be shown on all subsequent submittals, including the map for record. And per section 140C of the subdivision ordinance, we've noted that to ensure the design will mitigate adverse effects to the drainage on neighboring properties. No stormwater BPMs are required, and the streets have all been approved and added to the pending road name list. Environmental health had standard comments, and the subdivision will need to be approved by environmental health before going to final plat approval. GUC has approved this plan, and Eastern Pines Water Corporation will be able to supply water to the subdivision. DOT had pretty standard comments. They've noted that a cross pipe should be 200 foot from NC 33 and should have a drop inlet, was only the technical comments that they had. They've noted barricade devices and improved signage. Here's a few snapshots of the location. This is looking east down NC 33. I'm sorry, that was west. This is east. You can see that right now it's currently grassed. There's no trees there in the front. This is across the street. There's one house and the other is agricultural land. This is also another shot of the current condition of the site. Adjacent property owners have been notified, and staff has received a couple of phone calls in regards to the proposed development. The concerns were adverse effects to adjacent property. We've already had the developers go out and meet with the property owners as well as members of the planning department. So we're staying on top of that, and the only other comments were general design. The Technical Review Committee has recommended conditional approval. So now it requires planning board action.
Open it up for public hearing now, isn't that correct? And so now, we have, Landon Weaver and Richie Brown.
Richie Brown.
Okay.
Landon Weaver with Bill Clark Homes. We've Richie has put the subdivision plan together for preliminary plat approval. As Jason said, there were a couple of phone calls. We obliged the neighboring property owners to meet them on site with staff and try to alleviate any concerns with drainage that they had. That was their main concern. when going through the, studies of the plan, it didn't show any requirements for any BMPs, any ponds, any kind of retention of that, manner. We were well below the requirement for the county ordinance. But we have reached out to those adjoining property owners, and we're gonna put forth an effort to have some water retainage on the site. We're gonna have some kind of BMP. It's not required, but we're gonna go through that step and implement it to try to alleviate any concerns that they may have. So I just wanted to mention that we're putting forth an effort to make sure everybody is as happy as they can be, and spending more money than what's required to try to help the community out and the neighboring property owners. And we're just here for any questions if there may be any.
Y'all have any questions for the developers?
So is the Anderson property the one that's concerned with those two pipes?
Miss Wells. Miss Wells is here.
Okay. So what are those pipes doing right now? Are they draining through there? Is there a swale?
Talking about the two 15-inch pipes right
Yep,
there.
at two different inverts.
Yeah, well, there's an existing home there too, and Ms. Wells may want to speak to the fact too, because she lives there. She's been there for a while as a next door neighbor of that home, but it's been flooded out in the past.
Okay.
County has received several calls on that piece of property. It's got a moat in front of it, and it's like 5 or 10 feet from the front door. It's just unreal why they built the house where they did, but it naturally comes down and goes through there and goes in the front yard of that home, and then it goes to Miss Wells' property, her and her family's property. It goes in the backyard, and they've had some historical issues with drainage back there, as she can attest to, but and it's existing, so we're not going to compound that problem. We're actually, believe Richie can speak to this better, but our design that we have actually is a reduction from what it is now. And then we're gonna go above that.
Okay.
And do even more. So, the post-construction will be less than what it is now, and we're even gonna do more than that.
Okay.
To try to help Miss Wells' situation out. But the other home, I don't know if there's any help into that. It's just it's already been flooded.
Now, when you refer to the Wells home, which lot is that in relation to these plans?
She's off of Farmington, and I'm not sure.
I have sort of just a hand-drawn, if you want to.
Yeah.
Speak into the mic, state your name and your address, please.
Sorry, I'm Amy Wells. I live at 333 Farmington Road.
3 minutes.
Oh, well, they aren't finished, are they?
You have 3 minutes to speak.
Well, I was gonna let them finish first. Do you want me to go ahead and go now?
I'm done. You can go, Ms.
Okay.
Wells. That's fine. As long as we remain open for questions if y'all need
I
anything.
have a hand-drawn map here, and she'll hand that out for y'all to see, just so you see where my property is. My property's on the other side of the Anderson property. My house is fortunately in front of the drainage area. It's a large gully. It's about 50 feet wide. It's about as tall as I am. It floods up to about as tall as I am 3 times a year, and during any hurricanes, takes about a day to drain back down. Fortunately, as he said, my property is set up enough so that, as currently stated, my house does not flood. My septic tank is in between my house and this gully. I've not had any problems with flooding with any of that. But it wouldn't take huge amounts more water in order for there to be a flooding problem in my backyard. And so that's my concern. They have been, Bill Clark Homes people, as well as the county, have all been out to my house. Everybody has been very nice and talked to me about the options that they are looking into to try to address this problem. But that's our primary concern, is that we don't want the neighborhood, the development of Gobbler's Ridge and the way that drainage pond is being located to focus everything right there in a concentrated way down that to cause additional flooding onto our property. I realize that the subdivision ordinance requires that there not be additional burden on neighboring properties and that type of thing, and I think they're making every effort to do that in their design process, but when the rubber meets the road, when everything's actually put in place and the first rain happens, and there's not really a way to know what's going to happen then until it actually occurs. And by that point, my septic tank and my house will be flooded, and it'll be too late. So that's why I'm trying to get on top of this and work with everybody to make sure that the best option is chosen, and that not just the minimum steps are taken, but as the ordinance allows, that the county puts in place more expanded steps to make sure that doesn't happen. And I apologize for the informal nature of the sketching on the map, but I did want everyone to understand where everything was and why that was a concern for us. And again, just like Landon said, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as well. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Wells or Mr. Weaver or Mr. Brown? Ms. Hemme?
I'm looking, I need staff to help me because, you know, she probably didn't draw it to scale, so I'm kind of wanting to know this broken line. Yeah.
I can actually probably answer that for you.
Okay.
There is on my property, Donnie Brewer developed our neighborhood and my house, and he lived in my house for a very long time, and he and I had a conversation about this the other day. That broken line is a 20-foot access easement, or a 20-foot drainage easement that's currently on the property for the benefit of the Anderson property. It, of course, is well exceeded. I mean, it's only a 20-foot drainage easement. The current drainage area is well in excess of that 20 feet. But that's what I sketched in there on that 20 feet. And no, I'm sorry, it's not to scale.
Right, and the two other blocks, explain those to me.
Okay, the box in front of that sketched area, that's my house.
Okay, and what is that one behind it?
The other one is the Anderson house.
Anderson's house.
So you can see kind of where it's related. It's right at the back of its property line, and the water flows in front of it, just kind of in its front yard. And as Landon said, it's flooded not into the house, but around the foundation and into the garage. I think it happens about once a year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay. Public hearing is closed now. Jason?
So Jason, the, this drainage situation, as I heard someone say about it all eking back or all going into that particular area, you saying that this proposed plan will not do that, will not cause further drainage on this property that the applicant was talking, the young lady was talking about?
Yes, sir. With the stormwater calculations, it's actually showing that it's not going to increase the amount of water drained there. And they're proposing a retention area to hold water from it just to give them a little bit of buffer there for that area.
Okay.
And to your knowledge, Ms. Wells is comfortable with what the developers have shared with her, right?
To the best of my knowledge is she wants us to make sure that we're staying on top of it and that she's in the loop with everything. And we told her we'll do that the whole way.
And probably just one point to make too, the detailed calculations, the stormwater improvements, all that will actually be shown in detail on the construction plan. So we'd certainly like Ms. Wells to be involved in that process. That doesn't come back to you, but that just reinforces what you've heard tonight to ensure that the runoff doesn't exceed what currently is the case.
So will we be in order to then make that a stipulation in our approval that that would happen? Would it be okay?
You may, I would suggest that it meet the minimum requirements of our subdivision ordinance, because that's really all the authority we have right now.
Okay.
And it's gonna do that anyway.
Right.
No, well, we want to make sure we stipulate that, so that, right, so that in case if they don't, then we'll have something to go back with. Okay.
Okay. So with that being said, what is the pleasure of the board?
Well, based on the set of facts and also with that stipulation, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we would approve same.
Got a motion on the table. Here's a second.
Whoa.
A second.
Got a second? Is it Tucker?
Yes.
Okay. Got a motion that we approve the preliminary plat.
Yes, sir.
And so all in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Ooh, that was close.
Next up, we have Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Tonight, we have some subdivision ordinance amendments, just for your initial review, similar to how Eric laid out the schedule for the zoning ordinance amendments. These will be proposed to be effective January 1st next year. Right now, we're just presenting the draft amendments, gathering input you may have, and then we'll take that and then send out the draft amendments to the development community, since they will bear the brunt of most of these amendments or proposed amendments. That way they have adequate time to review them and come to the public hearing at the August meeting. And then go to the Board of Commissioners for their public hearing in their September meeting. So the first one is to propose curb and gutter be installed on new streets when the average buildable lot size, exclusive of the right-of-way, will be less than 1 acre. Right now, subdivisions, you can either have curb and gutter, you can have roadside ditches. There's pros and cons to both, but with a denser subdivision, we feel that curb and gutter would be more appropriate in most cases. So here's just an example of a curb and gutter in a new Pitt County subdivision. Here's an example of a well-executed roadside ditch. It's got great vegetation, gentle slopes, and just something that we want to get away from is, the deeper ditches, roadside ditches with the steeper slopes that will become, more of a maintenance burden on homeowners, and harder to establish and maintain the vegetation. The second item is requiring sidewalks to be installed along one side of proposed streets in new subdivisions when the average buildable lot size, exclusive of the right-of-way, is less than 1 acre. And if sidewalks are proposed on both sides of the street, one side could count towards an open space requirement that we'll touch on in a few minutes. So this is just an example of sidewalk in a Pitt County subdivision. With the addition of cluster mailbox units, having pedestrian traffic separate from vehicle traffic to access those mailboxes, it would be a great benefit. The next item is for new subdivisions to have road frontage along state-maintained roads to have a landscape buffer, meaning some conditions in Section 10H of the Pitt County zoning ordinance. Basically, that means having a canopy tree every 40 feet of road frontage and then evergreen shrubs every 4 feet. So here's an example of, and a lot of the developers are doing this anyway, but we feel it, improve the aesthetics of new subdivisions. So here's an example of one that was installed. And here's a newer one where they used understory trees instead of canopy trees because you have, overhead power lines. Something we've talked about before is cluster box units. What we want to do is adopt NCDOT's standards for access and design of these cluster box units, just so we ensure proper accessibility to these box units. Here's a couple pictures of one that was been installed in a new subdivision. This one, they kind of moved outside the right-of-way, built a turnout. Here's a couple other examples. Right now, the specifications aren't generally included on our construction plans, so we want to include those and have those reviewed prior to these being constructed. That way, we ensure that they meet those DOT standards for accessibility. The next item just kind of cleans up some of the language in the ordinance regarding road maintenance. Just ensuring that when we're trying to enforce maintenance requirements of the ordinance, we're addressing all roads, not just stub roads. Similar language correction here, just improving the clarity. And something that came up at your last meeting regarding voluntary ag districts, we'd like to include a statement on all future preliminary and final plats for subdivisions that whether the subdivision is within or outside of that half-mile voluntary ag district buffer. That way, potential homeowners are aware that, you know, there might be some agricultural use in the area. And the last meat and potatoes item is regarding park, recreation, and open space. This will be a new section to the ordinance, and it will require new major residential subdivisions to provide public or private park, recreation, or open space in the amount of 0.03 acres per lot, or they could elect to do a payment in lieu of the open space dedication. Cluster developments would be subject to those separate zoning ordinance requirements for the cluster developments. So the goal is just to have, you know, more recreational area for Pitt County residents or enhance the existing parks that we do have. This is just, you know, a picture of what a typical neighborhood park could look like. So with that language, we're proposing an amendment to the existing definition for park recreation open space, just saying it could include up to 50% of lands that have sensitive environmental features, could be floodplain or wetlands. They could take advantage of using some of that area as open space and meet that requirement, or a portion of that requirement. Last item is to a certification that is stamped on all final plats. It's where the county manager signs. Just removing a sentence, the county has no authority to maintain streets. Technically we do. We can assist DOT with street maintenance by financing necessary improvements and then putting a tax lien on the properties. So similar to the zoning ordinance amendments, right now we're just looking for general input prior to sending all these proposed amendments out to the development community and making them aware, you know, giving them a chance to, you know, get their comments together before they come for an actual public hearing regarding the amendments. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have or any input.
I've got a question, actually two. Have there been any issues with the cluster mailboxes in neighborhoods and maintenance in those areas? Are they under the homeowners association?
So they're generally treated as common area, so it would be up to the HOA for maintenance. We haven't had, I mean, these are the pictures I showed you are the first ones that we've seen. All the other previous subdivisions, you know, had a vested plan prior to this requirement from the Postal Service. So we just want to kind of get in front of that curve and have those installed correctly so there won't be any issues. And, you know, it is a good point to make sure the HOA documents do address maintenance of those.
Yeah, like who's going to mow around it and so forth, because I mean, because that's kind of like in little no man's land.
Right.
So, okay. And the other question, was there any thought of trying to look at stub outs on new subdivisions for interconnectivity in these amendments?
So some of the last amendments we did make did address stub outs, and we do require stub outs. At the most, 2 stub outs are required. If there's any tract over 10 acres, they have to stub it out to that. Sometimes you get a choice of where you want to stub to, but if they want to be a public street, then, you know, they do require those stub outs if it meets some of those conditions. Private roads, you know, some developers choose to go that route, so they don't have to have the stub outs, and we can't really do much about that.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mark? Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Next up, the man of the hour, Mr. James Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as you can tell, we've already put you on notice. You'll have a meeting next month, August 21st, at least 2 public hearings, probably 3, depending on the status of the zoning request, rezoning request. So just go ahead and mark your calendars. We'll definitely have a meeting next time. Okay, before we get started on the other regular informational items, I just want to spend a minute. This is hot off the press, this letter that's in front of you. This was emailed to me yesterday. I understand that most of you, if not all of you, should be getting this. You were copied on this, hopefully by mail in the next few days. But since it's so timely, I at least want to spend a minute to go over this and just kind of let you know a little history and kind of where the Pitt County Schools concerns lie here. So this is a letter that we've received from one of the administrators with the school board. It deals with the capacity of the schools. Not surprisingly, we do have, being in a faster growing community, we do have some capacity issues with the schools. So on page 3, you can actually see some of the raw numbers and projections for some of the schools that are impacted here. So again, this is the one that's got the little Pitt County Schools logo right up in the top left corner. With that, what the school board has concerns about, and especially the administrators, is whether in cases where we might have a rezoning that increases the density, they're wanting to ensure that we give proper attention to any types of rezonings in that case. Now, we've had very few, typically ours are the 25,000, 30,000 square foot lot minimums. This is more concerned with those developments that are going in on sewer. We won't be dealing with that many of them. So there have been some in some of the municipalities, Greenville and Winterville to be specific, where there have been large-scale rezonings with a large number of units that could potentially be developed there in the near future. So the bottom line for all of this is pretty much on page 2, last paragraph, it's requesting that future residential property rezoning requests that increase housing density, again, increasing the number of lots that would be allowed per acre, that the boards take into consideration the capacity situation in that district for those schools that are in that district as part of the approval process. What I would say is, you know, currently during our subdivision ordinance and/or zoning ordinance, we really don't have any language to hang our hats on there. General language maybe, but what I've recommended to our county manager and to our legal staff is that we have a meeting. Staff meet with Pitt County Schools administrators just to ensure that we've got a better feel for what they're requesting and what, if any, changes we might need to make to any of our regulations to accomplish that. So we'll be proactive. We'll be reaching out to them in the next few days and hopefully give you a follow-up on this at your next meeting. Any questions about this handout?
James, I guess that's what, go ahead.
Does Mr. Erickson come to your development review committee's meetings now, or?
He does not.
Is there somebody from the school district that can participate in those so that they can?
Possibly. That would certainly help. What we do in the review process is send them a copy of the plan to at least let them know that one is forthcoming. They typically advise us, you've seen them on some of the subdivision plans, which district that development site is located in. That's typically the extent of our comments from them. This takes it a whole lot further.
He did good, thank you. That's my question.
Okay. Okay, a few other items, just to follow up on the rezoning request that was before you a month or so ago. This was the one on NC 33 that was considered for rezoning to general commercial. The Board of Commissioners agreed with your recommendation and denied that request. It may be coming back in a much smaller scale, but we've not seen that yet. So I want to let you make you aware of that. Census 2020 Complete Count Committee. April 1st of 2020 is Census Day. We had our first Complete Count Committee meeting yesterday. We were very pleased with the folks that turned out for that. We've got representatives, about 40 representatives throughout the community, everywhere from the university to social services, health departments, the municipalities, a Mexican, NAACP. We've tried to hit every segment of the population here. Why is that important? We need to have folks in our community that are trusted, that can reach those hard-to-count populations. We want to get an accurate count. Why is that important? Couple of things. We need an accurate count so we're fairly represented when, again, we're dealing with redistricting and other issues. These census numbers are what are being used to come up with those new districts, whether it's here locally or even at the federal level. Number two, it all comes down to money. There's a lot of federal money that's based off of those census counts. We want to make sure we get the monies we deserve here. So we'll be meeting a few more times before Census Day. We'll be trying to reach out to different groups to ensure that they feel comfortable in filling out the census forms. One thing that's a little bit different this year, you'll be able to fill out your census form either on your computer or right on your phone. So that's all new. We're working, some of the people that attended our meeting yesterday are with the library. Why is that important? Library system has available computers if people don't have ready access at their homes. So we're trying to reach out, make sure we've got all the parties involved that need to be involved. If you know, or if you're interested in being part of this, if you know of other segments of the population that you feel like need to be represented, please let us know. We'll be meeting again a little bit later this year, but really our major event will be early next year, just preceding the April 1st Census Day. A few other items. We're fortunate enough to get some additional funding for some of our housing programs. I know the chairman will be participating in our meeting next week on July the 25th. We have our annual community development program meeting, and that's where people that are interested in any of our programs can come out and learn more about it, fill out an application in hopes of getting some home repairs. So if you know of people in your community that might be needing that type of service, next week, July 25th, 2 different sessions at 10 and 6 o'clock that day, people can come out and receive more information and pick up an application. The other one, we also received some additional funding for our homeless programs and getting people rapidly rehoused. A few other things in your package tonight, our monthly report, as well as some other articles that might be of interest to you. And as always, you can see this information on our website, and there's also a Census 2020 web page that's also been launched on the county website. Welcome any questions.
James, will you let them know the location of that meeting on the 25th?
Yeah, the meeting for our community development programs will be on Thursday, July 25th, 10 o'clock a.m., 6 p.m. at the Agricultural Center Auditorium. And that, of course, is located off Government Circle, north of the river.
It's located at 403 Government Circle.
403 Government Circle, north of the river.
Appreciate that, James.
Thank you.
All right. All hearts and minds are clear.
Very. Motion to
Adjourn.